This video is going to have a look at constructing a response to a question 11. Explore the ways in which the four characteristics of religion interact to create a dynamic living religion. So to have a look at some of those key words, explore means to investigate into. The four characteristics of religion, we have beliefs and believers. So you might want to take the time to pause the video and have a read through those points on beliefs and believers. Ethics, again, pause the video and have a read. Sacred texts and writings, and rituals and ceremonies. So this question is not asking for a description of each of those characteristics. It's really asking about this keyword interact. How do these four characteristics interact with each other to create a religion that is dynamic and living? So if we have a look at these keywords, dynamic and living. So dynamic is all about the flexibility of a religion to adapt to the society in which it is practiced without losing its key beliefs and central ideas. And then living, it means that it's alive and relevant and meaning to the adherent. These two key words are the result of those characteristics of religion being able to interact and adapt and still maintaining relevance. So the interaction between beliefs and believers and ethics is that ethics are written down in sacred texts, and they express clear beliefs which act as a guide for believers to apply in everyday life situations within particular communities, not just for that point in time, but for all ages hence. You can also provide an example where this is evident. So the interaction between ethics and sacred texts and writings is that ethics are recorded in sacred texts and they enable reinterpretation again as new context situations arise in society. And ethics that are recorded, whether they're oral or in visual form or they're written down in a sacred text, enable an individual to constantly refer to those ethics as a guide or a code of conduct. Sacred texts and rituals and ceremonies. Within a sacred text, or you will read about the life of the founder. These stories about the life of the founder form the basis for rituals and ceremonies. For example, you've got the story of Jesus' birth, born in a stable. He was visited by 3 kings bearing gifts. We see at Christmas that giving gifts is a major feature recognized at Christmas. Rituals and ceremonies and beliefs and believers. So beliefs are expressed in rituals and ceremonies, and believers express their beliefs, something beyond the ordinary, within these rituals and ceremonies. And we've also got that shared sense of community when believers get together and they participate in rituals and ceremonies, and they feel that sense of belonging because of their shared beliefs. Rituals and ceremonies and ethics. Both rituals and ceremonies as well as ethics are the visual expression of key beliefs. We have beliefs and believers, sacred texts and writings. Beliefs and believers refer to sacred texts to reinforce and reinterpret the beliefs. And so if we have a look at a written response that is going to focus on these key interactions between those characteristics of religion. We have our topic sentence, which identifies those key terms, dynamic and living. That draws our attention to these 2 key terms. So we're next going to focus on our extend, and we're going to mention those 4 characteristics of religion. Beliefs and believers, ethics, sacred texts and writings, and ceremonies and rituals. And now we're going to explore those links, not only between beliefs and believers, but sacred texts as well. So we'll be referring to this key point here, which demonstrates that interaction between those characteristics. Believers or adherents must, through faith, attest to a set of core beliefs in order to be a true adherent of that religion. Such doctrines and creeds are written down in sacred texts. For example, the Islamic Shahada, there is no God but God, and Muhammad is his prophet, expressing beliefs in clear form. So we have our example, and expressing beliefs in clear form lives to guide adherents in their daily lives. So now we'll move on to our next interrelationship between the characteristics, which is sacred texts and ethics. So we're referring now to the relationship between the ethical teachings and the sacred texts. Well, the most obvious one is that these ethical teachings are recorded in sacred texts. Bear in mind, sacred texts also refer to oral tradition or images. The thing about sacred texts is that they are continually being reinterpreted in light of new situations and contexts. For example, we could talk about the golden rule in Christianity, but we cannot forget our illustrative conjunction. So over time, ethical teachings are applied to new social societal contexts, walking a fine line between adapting to a changing society while still guiding its followers to hold true to its core paradigms. They're just synonyms so that we vary our language a bit and you don't sound repetitive saying beliefs all the time. So now we're going to talk about sacred texts and the interrelationship with rituals and ceremonies. So we will be discussing sacred texts and writings and rituals and ceremonies. Key events of the life of the founder are written down in sacred texts, and these then act as a guide for how rituals and ceremonies are to be celebrated. Okay, so sacred texts, whether in written form, communicated orally, or as images, also outline the key events and life experiences surrounding the founder of the religion and act as a guide for how rituals and ceremonies should be carried out and what they signify. As society changes, so too do aspects of ritual and ceremony. But as with ethics, the central beliefs of such events must remain steadfast. We've got our conjunction. This can be seen in the Jewish Passover, commemorating the Jewish exodus from Egypt, but once shared orally, though now shared in written form. That's a change in society. So we see here the story of the Jewish Passover being shared orally. We see the lamb, the sacrificial lamb, which was being eaten on that night of Passover, the unleavened bread, eaten in a hurry. They didn't have time to wait for the bread to rise because they had to pack up and leave Egypt. Bitter herbs and the eggs, which symbolize new life. Similarly, there is flatbread, there is wine that's being shared, there would be eggs on the table, lamb, bitter herbs. But we see that the story of the Passover is now being shared in written form using sacred texts. Because society has changed, so too have aspects of this celebration commemorating the Passover, but those central beliefs remain the same. Okay, so finally, we're going to look at the relationship between rituals and ceremonies and beliefs and believers. In doing that, we will be having a look at how beliefs are expressed in rituals and ceremonies, and this gives believers a sense of the sacred beyond the ordinary, but also the participation in a shared experience. So it gives that sense of community and that sense of belonging. Now we could go a little bit further and we could talk about the link between rituals and ceremonies and ethics. That rituals and ceremonies and ethics are the visual expression of key beliefs, and that ethics inform key aspects of ceremonies and rituals. We could also talk about the relationship between beliefs and believers and sacred texts and writings. It's fairly obvious. And finally, we'll go to our topic sentence. It is through the interconnection of the characteristics of religion that it remains dynamic and living. Without this flexibility, a religion becomes static and eventually null and void. And there's our paragraph. You're going to now answer the question, explain how the land, identity and the dreaming are inextricably linked in the lives of Aboriginal peoples. So first of all, explain is cause and effect. We've got those three key areas of Indigenous spirituality and culture. We've got the land, identity and the dreaming. And this idea of something being inextricably linked means first and foremost that there is a relationship between these three aspects. But the fact that they are inextricably linked means that if you take one of those aspects away, then the other two crumble. So if you take the land away, then Aboriginal people, obviously they lose their identity and they obviously lose their dreaming. If you take the dreaming away, then their identity crumbles and their understanding of their land, their spiritual understanding of the land dies with it. So if we have a quick look at what this short answer response is going to focus on the links between these three key features, the links in between them. Firstly, you're going to brainstorm as many links as you can between the dreaming and an Aboriginal person's identity. And a big hint is kinship. Next, you're going to brainstorm as many links as you can think of between an Aboriginal person's identity and the land. And then you're going to brainstorm as many links as you can between the land and the dreaming. So once you've done that, you'll kickstart with a topic sentence. And that topic sentence needs to identify these three aspects and the fact that they are inextricably linked. The fact that if you take away one, the whole system crumbles. And then you're going to use these different relationships to form the key points in your paragraph.